we have this need, I think, to fill in the blanks with words, I guess. And so, but thinking about what those words are, that person doesn't need to hear that you think that the person that they lost was selfish. They were sick. They died from suicide like someone else might have died from a heart attack or from cancer. They were sick and they died from that illness.
Have you heard the saying, the opposite of addiction is connection? We at the Addiction Prevention Coalition know that there's truth in that adage. And so we are fighting addiction face to face, conversation by conversation, creating connection. Here at The Shield, our new podcast, no topic is off limits because there are no limits when it comes to substance use disorder. Welcome to another episode of The Shield. We're so happy to have folks listening and watching, and I am really grateful to have Dr. Angela Sullivan with us today. Now, you were basically referred to me from Cheryl Dotson, who was our first guest on The Shield, and afterwards she was like, you have to have my friend and colleague Angela on this. So let me give your full titles, okay? I'm not going to read your full bio because I feel like that would take like a million years. But so you're an associate professor in the Department of Health Behavior at UAB, right? And you're the assistant dean of student and academic services in the School of Public Health.
That's right.
So you are you're very smart.
I don't think so. It's all,
that sounds really smart.
It does, and I don't like it because I don't consider myself very smart. I just consider myself having ended up places and hope that I can bring people along with me.
We were talking before, so you actually have lived in St. Louis,
right.
Which, you know, I love, so we bonded kind of instantly. So you were like a military brat?
I was a military brat. My mom and my dad were in the Army, and so we moved around a bit. They had a lot of interesting jobs that we were in St. Louis, for a while and ended up in Alabama, and we've just stayed here ever since. So I graduated high school from here, went to college here, all the colleges.
So you claim St. Louis, but you're really like
both.
Both.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's like I got to a point where eventually I'm like, do I need to stop claiming St. Louis? But that feels weird,
No, claim it.
Yeah,
claim it. We'll
claim
take all, any and all.
Yeah, and then I find people like you. I'm like, I'm proud to find bonding over that.
Totally. Last night I was, my boyfriend asked a question. He goes, if you could just at any moment have a map of a city, like in your house, like a map, like a very intricate map of any city in the entire world, what would it be? And because we were watching a show and there was a map of a city. And I was like, I didn't even hesitate. And he goes, it's St. Louis. I go, duh. Because I'm just like, proud to be a St. Louisan.
Yeah.
So I said, what would yours be? And he said, Paris. And I was like, oh, kind of a better answer, but also like, I like my St. Louis answer. So what is your answer?
Immediately Vienna. So
really?
my younger sister, she's 3.5 years younger than me. She's lived there for a number of years.
Oh, cool.
And so it's a very cool place to, have a landing zone and then be able to travel, all around Europe from there. So I would pick Vienna. It's beautiful. I love it. It's becoming a second home. Just
you failed because you didn't pick Birmingham.
Sorry. I know. Well, I will tell you what you don't know is I do have a map of Birmingham. So I don't need 2 maps of Birmingham.
Oh, okay, fair.
And I have a map of St. Louis, and I don't need 2 maps of St. Louis. But I will just admittedly, Vienna is the first thing that came to mind. So,
okay, I've never been, so
I recommend it.
Okay.
And no offense to Paris, very cool place as well. I think everyone should go there. But I think what people think they're going to get from Paris is actually located in Vienna.
Oh.
Yeah.
Whoa, hot take.
Yeah, hot take, I know. But people who've been to both say yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Very cool. You clearly didn't come on to talk about Vienna, but I like this.
Yeah, but I will. Yeah, I could go all day.
Right. So what I appreciate about you is that you are in academia, but no offense, you don't really seem like it.
Yeah, I'm not. So I became an assistant professor a year ago, but I've been in higher education for 20 years.
Whoa.
And so I'm a part of the Alabama Suicide Prevention and Resources Coalition. I think what a lot of people forget, I love collective nouns, like a murder of crows.
Murder of crows, yes.
Do you know what a coalition is a collective noun for?
No.
a group of activists. And so I don't consider myself, and I mean, I'm in academia. They have welcomed me in by giving me all these big titles and stuff, but I'm an activist for students, for mental health, for all, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, hopefully what you're picking up on.
That is the vibe I'm picking up for sure.
And that's why Cheryl Dodson recommended me then, because if anybody's an activist, it's Cheryl. And that's what I love about it is in academia, I don't end up with people being surrounded by people like Cheryl, but working in mental health, I do. And so that's why I gravitate toward that as my identity.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel it. Like it feels like that to me.
That's a huge compliment. Thank you.
So you are moving around, you eventually kind of plant some roots in Alabama.
Yes.
What brought you into this field, but then more specifically, not just practicing it, but also teaching it and really elevating the profession? How did we get here?
Yeah, so to make a long story short, I mean, it's been about 20 years or so, but I've always been around mental health and helping with mental health from like out of the darkness walks, things like that. I've always been interested in suicide prevention. And when I ended up in Birmingham in 2012, 2014-ish is when I started becoming involved with ASPARC. And then I realized I was working at the School of Public Health at the time, and I realized I'm not sure another admission cycle can go by without me applying for the PhD in health education, health promotion, because what better to couple a bunch of activists with being familiar with policy and intervention and evaluation. And so then what happens?
Because it like legitimizes it a little bit.
Legitimizes
Right.
it. And then it helps the organization. It really, like you said, it helps legitimize it. And then it makes our efforts kind of seem more fruitful. So trying to find balance of doing, the out there, the rah-rah work, and not to delegitimize that, but
Sure.
there's all right, we're putting together these walks, we're putting together all these different coalitions or partnerships, I guess I should say. But then there's also the piece where how do we give back, like what we've learned through even how we administer our QPR, question, persuade, refer, our gatekeeper suicide prevention training. How can we kind of give that back? We've gotten so much good feedback on how we approach our training. I published an article last week from the qualitative parts of my dissertation, which was years ago. So, it takes a while to get around to these things sometimes. But
and then to get them published, by the way, can we just take a beat and talk about how long it takes,
and it's
not just for the research,
Yeah.
but also then to craft the paper and then to actually submit them to journals and then to get it published. And, that's why research sometimes is seen as it's in this kind of ivory tower,
Right.
because the system is set up so that it's, there's a pretty incredible lag,
Yes,
actually.
That's right.
But so it's not like you've just been twiddling your thumbs, waiting to take this qualitative data, which is like the stories and the anecdotes and all of those things. So not like you've just been waiting to do it.
That's true.
It just takes a long time.
It does, and then it becomes so personal because the qualitative piece, these were interviews that I conducted with people who had taken our training and then used it. They intervened on someone who was experiencing a suicidal crisis, and so talking about that with them. And in some cases, maybe they did end up losing this person later. And so considering all the pieces that goes into their individual story, not just I'm out there gathering data, it's these personal connections with people. And every time we learn, or with every interview, we learned kind of filling in some blanks of, what suicide looks like worldwide, nationally, and then in the state of Alabama, and then going through the training and people saying, gosh, I didn't realize so many people felt this way. I've even felt this way, and they'll recall not even realizing gosh, I was so depressed for so long. And I can see how other people feel this way, and I can see how it can get to this point, and it really gives people an opportunity to explore the different ways in which like empathy manifests, I would say. So it's been really cool. It's been really, really cool. And being able to then connect with people across the country who do the same work that we do, and saying, here's just a little tweak that we made to the front of our official training from the QPR Institute. We can add things at the front, we can add things at the end, our role play when we do that, and then being able to share it back. That is why I wanted to go into academia. Now, like I mentioned before, I've been staff for 20 years, and so I've worked in enrollment management and student services.
Oh, I can see you'd be really good in student services. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's for like the kids who are like struggling or like coming in and like getting their feet, like making them feel comfortable, making sure that they have what they need, right? Like it's really,
You're there.
Okay.
It's even people who are like, I'm not sure if this is for me. I'm not sure if I belong.
Right.
Right. I like to use, I talk about imposter syndrome a lot. And
what is that?
So imposter syndrome is exactly what it sounds like. It's where you get that feeling where it's like, I'm not sure I belong here, or like I'm an imposter in this space.
Yep.
And so I have felt personally like that a lot in academia. I just let it keep me humble. I mean, what else are you going to do,
Right. I feel often like I'm, like at Thanksgiving, there's like a kid table and then there's a grown-up table.
Yes.
And a lot of times I feel like I'm at the grown-up table when I really should be at the kid table, and I'm looking around going, do people know that I'm sitting here?
That is the best analogy I've ever heard.
Do you know what I mean?
It's
like I'm just looking around going, do people know I'm sitting here? Like, and I would much rather be at the kids table.
Yeah.
Most times,
well,
right? Like I'd much rather be at the kids table, and I'm certainly more comfortable there.
Yes. Well, and then it's like, should I move myself to the kids' table?
Exactly.
Or will someone come move me?
Are they going to kick me out?
And how embarrassing will it be
Totally.
when they come and move me?
So maybe I'll just move myself so that they don't have to come and move me.
Yeah. Now, I have actually had to take this a step further. I have had, using that analogy, people try to move me back to the kids' table.
Oh, yes.
But then I'll tell you what, I'm like, you know what? I was invited to this adult table, which means all of our voices at this adult table matters, and you're going to hear mine whether you want to or not. And if you don't like it, you can jump on over to the kids' table.
You go to the kids' table. Yes.
And so it's like this weird kind of paradox.
But I think that because you can understand both sides of that, I think that would really well position you in student services, right? Because it's like, I was a first-gen college student, and so I was in college looking around going, this is awesome. Mm-hmm. Like, and I worked really hard to get here, and my family's so proud of me, and like, but then at the same time, it's like, what am I doing? And I'm supposed to figure out what I want to do with my life. I'm, 18. Like, how am I supposed to figure that out, right? And so it's like two things can be true at one time. Mm-hmm. Like, as humans, we can hold two things that are conflicting, and that's what makes us uniquely human.
Yes. Well, and that's why, and I'm 38, and I'm still like, I don't know. It's like, I'm cool with what I'm doing right now, but is this the final thing? Who knows?
It's the secret to being a grown-up.
Yeah.
Is that no grown-ups know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I still, and me and my husband were actually talking about it this weekend because I had one thing planned and it was canceled. And so we raided the vending machine downstairs and then played video games for 2 full days. And you know what?
Sweet.
It was beautiful. That's when I was wanting to grow up and be an adult. This is the weekend I had in mind.
This is the weekend. But I think that at least, we're about the same age. I'm a little older than you, but I think that, when we were younger, and this is no shade or anything, but like adults didn't really talk about what it means to be a grown-up.
No, they
like
didn't.
I knew about bills, okay? I knew that my parents worked, but I didn't know what went into being a grown-up and how sometimes I now know why we would have like the same thing for dinner every Tuesday and we would have breakfast for dinner a lot.
Yep.
Because that stuff was easy.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't think about it.
Yeah.
I was talking to some first graders the other day, and we were talking about Yeah.
Just a crowd of first graders.
A crowd of first graders. We were doing a lesson about friendship, and we were talking about different things. And I shared with them that one of the things that makes grown-ups special is that they can have ice cream whenever they want for dinner.
That is true.
And the kids were like,
true.
what?
That is true.
And like, you can. You totally can if you want to.
Yeah, you know what I wanted yesterday for dinner? Cheese dogs. Yeah. And so I did.
What is a cheese dog?
Is
it a pig in a blanket?
No, it is a hot dog that's got cheese in it, and it's not made
like
for adults.
Like a hot dog with cheese in the center.
Yeah.
Okay, I know.
It's, I think not for adults, but
who
money,
says?
So I bought it.
You have money and you have free will and
Yes.
you're a grown up.
Yes.
You pay your damn bills, right?
Yep.
You can buy a
Yep.
cheese dog if
Yep.
you want one.
Yep.
But I think that is the secret, is that adults do not have it figured out.
No.
And I wish that when I was a teenager that I would have known
Same.
that adults don't have it figured out, and they are literally just caving into their cheese dog cravings sometimes because life is hard.
Well, and then they feel guilty for it.
Yes.
And the thing I do remember is now my mom, not just because she's a vegetarian, I don't see that woman ever eating a cheese dog in her life. The other thing is, like, my parents were older, so they were even not even representative of like the generation of most of my friends. They could have been my friends' parents. They were much older, so they even had a little bit more of that. Now, I love my parents; they're very like vulnerable and emotionally open and stuff, but we didn't have this kind of talk. They would say things like, oh, tonight's whip up, which means you get whatever you want out of the fridge. And it's just like, you can say we got to clean the fridge out. You know what I mean? Like,
right, exactly.
I love it. And so, but I noticed immediately, like, you're making me feel like I have some power, but like, I don't say what goes in this fridge, because if it were up to me, again, there'd be cheese dogs, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I wish that we talked about these things, because I do find it's easier to approach the adulting stuff when you can just be open about, like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And that's not a goal of mine. I have no intention to figure it all out. I'm just trying to contribute as best I can while I'm doing what I'm doing right now.
Right. And I think that your position at UAB puts you in a unique place to be able to talk to those students who are coming in, who are kind of like facing the imposter syndrome, or facing the, what am I supposed to do? Or how am I actually supposed to do this? Mm-hmm. But then you're also working with the students who have identified that they have certain passions in these fields, particularly around mental health.
Yes. So right now, for example, I'm teaching 2 classes. One of them is an in-person class called Suicide Prevention, because that's how creative I am with names.
That is very creative.
It is what it is. And I told them up front, I taught this class in a pilot a year and a half ago in a 10-week term, and now we're in a 15 or 16-week term, 3 days a week. And so I said, this is the second time I've ever offered this class. I'm still piecing it together in a way that makes sense. And so I'm going to ask you for a lot of feedback. And at first they're like, okay, yeah, we get surveys at the end of every semester. And I'm like, no, I don't think you understand what I mean. I'm worried that the way we're doing quizzes isn't working. What if we had reflection papers instead? And so they're like, yes, we like that better. And then they come up with better ideas. We're almost at the end of the semester. And so, I've told them, I said, as far as suicide prevention goes, I would consider you all in the top, 1, 2, 3% in the world as far as, understanding the frameworks and all of the different intervention options and things like that. Now help me do this even better for the next group of people that comes through this class. And the other feedback I keep getting from like that approach is they're so comfortable sharing feedback now. The class is all about communication. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, I'm not trying to trick you. I am openly getting you comfortable providing feedback to people who seem to be in a position of authority, because you're here and your opinion matters. We get most of our best feedback from students. And so I've got you right here. I'm going to use your voices, and I encourage you to use them. And it's so interesting. 100% of the class has provided some kind of feedback.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been really nice.
Well, and you're getting them ready for if they choose to go into this field or to be a practitioner, right? Because in public health or health behavior, I mean, you can study it, you can actually do it.
Right.
You could I mean, there's a million different paths, so
Yeah.
not everybody will become, an interventionist
Right.
or whatever. But so much of suicide prevention and substance use prevention
Yeah.
is communication, right? It's listening, it's asking the right questions, and making sure that you're asking it in a way that is not off-putting or stigmatizing.
Right.
So when I asked you at the very beginning before we turned on the mics, I said, what are you passionate about? And like, without even hesitating, you were like, destigmatizing language. So talk about what that means. And I will just say that, some people kind of hear like language and people first language and like roll their eyes and they're like, oh, here we go again. But it's more than just like being woke. Like,
Yeah.
there is a reason for the
Yeah.
language shift.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about the reason for it and talk a little bit about what we know now?
Yeah. Would you mind if I use an analogy? You use
Go.
one so good to talk about imposter syndrome. Okay, so let's say we're friends. We are.
We are friends.
Right. We
Okay.
immediately made friends. And so let's say it's lunchtime and not morning time. We go to a soup and salad place.
Okay.
You've got your soup. You've got your salad. You got this pickle spear.
Okay.
And I go, hey, you're not going to eat that pickle, are you? What am I looking for from you? Like, what?
You want my pickle.
I want your pickle. And so what if I said, hey, you're not going to kill yourself, are you?
I'd be like,
no, of course not.
No, of course not.
Right?
No.
I'm not even asking in a way. Now, I truly, truly, genuinely believe if a person cares about you enough or understands, like, gosh, this person is in a situation, like, I'm worried about them, I think asking, that's great. That's a good thing. And we want people to do that. But asking in a way that is like, ooh, something's up, like, I need to get my pat on the back, like, you're not going to kill yourself, right? Like, you're good, I'm good, we're good.
Yeah, because then you feel like you've checked it off in your brain.
Right.
But it's done in a way that's like, makes the other person go like, ugh.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so even the way in which you ask, like, a more appropriate ask would be, you could even lead up to it, like, gosh, I've noticed I haven't seen you around much lately. It's almost like you're isolating yourself. Like, are you feeling all right? Everything going okay? And you can have a conversation that still ends in a, I'm worried you're thinking about hurting yourself. I'm worried you're thinking about killing yourself. Are you? And so then we've opened up the conversation. So even how we ask, but the other piece of it that I don't think gets talked about quite as much is if there has been someone who has attempted or who has died from suicide, everything from their end of life services. You hear things like, and I've lost a person or two to suicide, and often the first thing people would introduce me, I think it's like a Southern culture thing, where you're like, oh, that's so-and-so, they had breast cancer last year. Oh, that's so-and-so, they lost their mom to suicide. But that's not what people were saying to me. They were saying, oh, that's so-and-so, she lost her friend killed himself. And that was that was like my introduction, And then at funeral services, it's not just that people would refuse, or end of life services, it's not just that people would, entities would not allow those services to be hosted, but it's hearing things like, oh, they were so selfish, or oh, they didn't pray hard enough, or all these things. We have this need, I think, to fill in the blanks with words, I guess. And so, but thinking about what those words are, that person doesn't need to hear that you think that the person that they lost was selfish. They were sick. They died from suicide, like someone else might have died from a heart attack or from cancer. They were sick and they died from that illness. And so I think respecting that space is a part of destigmatization. And so it's not just when we still have people here, it's the people who we've lost as well, because then you're kind of putting them in this dark corner.
Yeah, like committed suicide. That
Yes.
sounds like they're committing a crime.
A crime, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it in sixth grade, I will never forget this. In sixth grade, one of my classmates, his father died by suicide, and I grew up Catholic, and I remember that and left a lot. There were a lot of kids. So I think there were like 5 or 6 kids. And so they were kind of all throughout the grade school, right? And so like a stair step. And again, I was in the 6th grade, and there was a lot of conversation about whether or not, they could have a service. And ultimately, they decided to just have sort of a celebration of life, but it was still very sad, right?
Yeah.
And I just remember all of the, and I don't know if this is the right word, but all of the survivor guilt that existed with his wife and the kiddo in my class, just kind of thinking about like, what could I have done differently? And if that already exists, then to pile on with language, like, it's not helping.
It's not
right?
helping.
I mean, there was so much conversation. I just remember this distinctly about whether or not, like, he had committed a crime and whether or not, like, he could even be honored in the church. And it was just, as a 6th grader, I was like, whoa. And I couldn't even imagine how my friend was dealing with that with his dad.
Yeah. Well, and it's so hard. I have a friend who lost his I believe she was 11 years old. And he was a freshman in college, so he was off at college. And it's not just the language used to describe that. And I think survivors, I think that's the right thing. I'll tell you in 3 months, another phrase is going to come out.
Sure.
And we just, you can move. It's kind of like I've been working in suicide prevention for about 20 years. Saying commit suicide was the language for so long.
Absolutely.
I still say it sometimes. And I just say, oops, I mean died from or died by.
Yeah.
And move on. I think that's part of it too, is a lot of people are afraid to say anything because they don't want to say the wrong thing.
Exactly.
I can appreciate that. But going back to this friend who lost his very young sister, people would also ask how she did it. And so,
yes.
And so just to make them relive the worst moments of their life just for some like morbid curiosity, I think that's a part of destigmatization.
I agree. Like the questions like, well, how or why? Like look, like, come, I mean, it is that morbid curiosity, I think. And I think it's also like, I think it's a seeking to understand.
Yeah.
But they don't have the right language to seek to understand. And then sometimes we just have to understand. We might not understand.
Yeah.
Especially if we're talking about, a mental health disorder, especially if it had gone unrecognized or untreated. I mean, there might never be a quote unquote explanation.
Yeah. And I think too, again, people are just looking to fill the space. I've had several times where I will conduct a training or I'll do a guest lecture or I've done several, I've been lucky enough to talk about suicide prevention on a lot of podcasts and radio and news and things like that. And after I've talked about this very subject, I've had people say, "Oh, I know you lost so and so. How did they do it? What happened?" And I think again, it's just trying to understand. Like, I don't truly think there's any malintentions. But language is so very important in every aspect of mental health and really just understanding. I assume we're all wishing the best for people and learning. Right, I'm in higher ed, and so I'm constantly saying, all right, here's an opportunity for us to talk about language, and I'll do that. And I've never had anybody get mad at me or be uncomfortable with my explaining. Well, here's why we would say that. And when it comes to like commit suicide, every single major religious text has some version of commit murder, commit adultery, commit. And this language is, all these religions kind of version of you do this and you've like damned yourself. And so repeating that kind of language is scary for people. And I've even heard folks saying that in front of people little kids who've lost a parent to suicide. And it's hard. And then, those are some of the first memories that they'll have about that is, oh, Aunt so-and-so said this at Dad's funeral, or, you know what I mean? So it's hard.
So some people who might be listening are like, okay, gosh, we're, really early into the season, and we've already had 2 episodes that talk about suicide. And like, I thought this was like a substance use. I thought this was mental health. And I guess one thing that I would like to point out, and I'd really like you to kind of hit home, is like substance use overdose rates. The news is actually pretty good. Like we're trending down, particularly in some higher risk populations. It doesn't mean we should stop and rest on our laurels,
Right.
but we're figuring out that naloxone saturation is a key, right? So that's Narcan. But suicide rates are not going down.
Right.
Okay. So, and hopefully I don't have to tell anybody listening or watching that there is a link between mental health and substance use and suicide. And sometimes people intentionally overdose. Sometimes people accidentally overdose. And there's a lot of trauma and all of that. Could you talk a little bit about where we are right now with suicide nationally, but specifically in Alabama, and like why people should care?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're actually, I talked about earlier the way ASPARC conducts our suicide prevention trainings. The reason we have the data stuff at the forefront of our trainings is because I don't think people realize what a huge public health burden it is. And so Alabama has higher rates of suicide than the national average, and has since the late 1980s.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time, please,
Yes.
for those in the back?
So if you look at rates of suicide per 100,000 people, there's the national rates, and then there's rates by state, by county. Some cities have these in their data, have these data as well. And so Alabama has had higher rates of suicide than the national average since the late 1980s. We crossed the national average at around 88, 89, and we have been above ever since. And the thing that's very interesting about that is we don't really know why. Suicide is very, very complex. And then on the other side is it's really hard to say how many lives you've saved, right? We're looking at we're wanting something to not happen.
Preach, okay?
Y'all know.
In substance use prevention, it's like our best work happens when nothing happens.
Yes.
So people are like, well, does it work? Well, I don't know. You tell me. Look at all these people that aren't in emergency rooms and principals' offices and whatever. Our best work happens when nothing happens. But so we don't know how many people we've saved.
Right. So we don't know how many people, and this is actually something that we talk about at the end of training. You know, we've got some numbers, we've got some protective factors, but the thing is, in Alabama, we have all of the things working against us that every other state has, but then there's a lot of things that are working for other states that we just don't have. And so there's a bit of a resource problem. We have a lot of rural areas in Alabama, and throughout the world there are studies that have gone on in every corner of this globe that doesn't have corners, where we found that wherever you are in the world, if you're in a rural area, there are higher rates of suicidal activity, so everything from self-harm to substance misuse to completed suicides, but there's also a lack of resources. The other thing is, for a suicide to occur, you've got to have a, thwarted sense of belonging. There's got to be some form of isolation. And again, it's perceived. Mm-hmm. So it could be, I'm the only person that looks like me or prays like me or has a job I have or has a family that looks like my family. Isolation doesn't literally mean isolation, but it also does literally mean isolation, right? And so we have got, again, all of those factors present in our state. And again, we've had higher than national rates for a long time now.
Yeah. Plus, then you combine that with access to a means.
Yes.
And that's a whole, I know that's a whole kind of other conversation about calming measures, like controlling access to lethal means, which is not just guns, but there's lots of other different ways that people consider, taking their life. And if they are feeling isolated and they're feeling anxious or are overwhelming, plus they have access, then that kind of is the perfect storm.
Exactly.
And a lack of resources to reach out to for help.
Yeah, you're right. And there's everything kind of coming at us from both angles. And when it comes to means, that's the thing that's interesting as well, is when you start parsing out the populations, veterans have higher rates. We have a lot of veterans in this state. If you look at completed suicides nationally, firearms make up about 50% of that. In Alabama, it's about 80%. And so it's not just the means we have access to, but it's the means we have access to are far more deadly than something that might take a longer time or get found out. One of the things that I end up talking about a lot that I think is very interesting, women actually attempt about 4 times more than men. But men have higher rates of suicide. Simply being born male, you are at a higher risk of suicidal activities and substance misuse, which you probably already know. But it's interesting.
It is interesting, and what I appreciate about you in particular is that you're not coming from it in a super cerebral way. Like you are, because you're intelligent and you have the letters in front of and behind your name, but there's also like an empathic, compassionate way that you are talking about it and also teaching future practitioners about it, which is what is needed.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, and then I hope it translates into other areas as well. I'm thinking about the makeup of the suicide prevention class right now. I've got students in there who are I would say interested in and outright activists for trans rights and LGBTQ health. I've got folks in there who are doing maternal and child health as their majors, and they're really, really interested in postpartum care.
Oh, love that.
Yeah,
yes.
We've got a huge, and I'm not a parent, and so this is a little bit outside of, a lot bit outside of my, like the things I'm thinking about day to day. Postpartum care just isn't one of that's not an experience of mine. But most of the women I'm closest to, that they've had kids.
It's huge. Yeah.
And so thinking about what that looks like in our state and in our country, and even the types of questions that moms get when they are in their first couple weeks. They're going to make sure baby's okay. But I'm just trying to imagine going from like my life as it exists now to having a little baby.
Oh, yeah. Forget about it. And then your hormones are raging and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what you're doing is in the way that you're teaching this class, but also approaching things is like you're really setting up the next generation of public health practitioners. And as a public health nerd, I am so grateful for that.
Thank you.
Really.
That's all I really want to do, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's all I'm trying to do.
It's huge, and public health, I think, is one of those professions and fields that is so big that people don't really realize what's all encompassing, but it's so big that it kind of encompasses everything.
Right. And when it's working, it's kind of like when it's working, you don't really think about it. And
when it's not working, right.
Or
exactly.
when there's a crisis. I mean, we didn't talk about this, but during COVID, I ran. So UAB was awarded this huge pass-through project that went from the CDC to the Alabama Department of Public Health to UAB, and I was the project manager for this, and it was $142 million that I was in charge of for some reason.
Talk about imposter syndrome, right? You're like sitting around going,
Well, and what I really liked about that project is we were all actually so open about how huge it was.
Yeah.
And we're like, all right, so there's this budget and it looks ridiculous, but it's just like any other budget. I mean, if you've got, $100,000 in your budget which is also a huge budget now that I'm saying it, but then kind of translating like, okay, I've been at that point I was a few months out of, getting a PhD in public health. I had been working in admissions and enrollment management. So I'm like, all right, I've done, projects. I can do this project. But that got a lot of attention where otherwise people are like, wait, now what is public health? You work at this school, you do nursing? I'm like,
right.
No. My mom was a nurse. I don't, but
Right.
We've got a coordinated degree, but no, public health isn't nursing.
Well, Thank you so much for being on here. I really
Yes.
appreciate it. You have a standing invitation to come back and talk anytime, especially if you have a new paper or research or whatever that comes out.
Yeah.
Would love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you liked what you heard, and I know you did, especially if you're a public health nerd like I am, please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to The Shield. Thank you again, Angela.